I speak these words as the president of Burkina Faso. But before that, I speak as a man shaped by faith, by memory, and by responsibility. I am a Christian not because it gives me comfort, not because it brings me status, but because it demands truth from me when silence would be easier. My faith was not born in safety. It was formed in villages where prayers were whispered, not sung, in places where belief was hidden, not celebrated, where elders taught hope quietly because hope was dangerous. It was strengthened by men and women who believed even when belief cost them everything, and it was refined by the eyes of children who learned fear before they learned Scripture. I am not here to accuse anyone. I am not here to campaign. I am not here to perform morality. I am here because what I have seen no longer allows me the luxury of being quiet. Because real leadership, when it is honest, must sometimes confess before it commands. Africa is not a headline to me. It is not a statistic. It is a living wound and a living hope. And today, that hope is standing in fire. I must begin with the warning that weighs heaviest on my conscience, the quiet forgetting of persecuted Christians in Africa. I have walked through villages where the church bell no longer rings, not because faith has died, but because those who rang it were killed or forced to run into the night with nothing but their children in their arms. I have listened to mothers who no longer ask when their husbands will return, because they already know the answer. I have prayed beside men whose only crime was refusing to deny Christ when a weapon was placed in front of their face and silence was offered as survival. These people are not symbols. They are not stories for conferences. They are not tools for ideology. They are human beings. Believers whose names will never appear in international speeches, yet whose blood has soaked into the soil of this continent. What frightens me is not only the cruelty of those who attack them. Cruelty has always existed. What frightens me is how easily the world has learned to look away. In many parts of Africa, Christians wake each morning unsure if they will still have a home by nightfall. Churches are burned not during war, but during prayer. Entire communities disappear quietly. No cameras, no headlines, no outrage, only ashes and memory fading. And even within the global church, the response is often polite, theological, and distant. We say we are praying, but we do not ask what prayer demands of us. When suffering becomes familiar, compassion weakens. When persecution happens far away, it becomes easier to spiritualize it instead of confronting it. I have heard sermons about courage that never mention the courage of those who choose death rather than deny their faith. I have heard believers speak passionately about freedom of religion while knowing nothing about the believers being hunted in Africa. This forgetting is not neutral. It is not harmless. It carries moral weight. When one part of the body suffers and the rest feels nothing, the problem is not distance. The problem is numbness. I am not asking for guilt. Guilt changes nothing. I am asking for memory, because memory is the beginning of responsibility. The persecuted Christians of Africa are not asking to be rescued by foreign powers. They are asking not to be erased. They are asking that their lives matter as much as their beliefs, that their deaths not be treated as background noise to someone else's comfort. I have met pastors who bury their congregation one by one and still preach forgiveness. I have met families who flee with nothing but Scripture memorized in their hearts because their Bibles were burned. I have met young people who understand the cost of discipleship more deeply than many theologians ever will. And yet, they remain invisible. This absence teaches a dangerous lesson. It tells the persecuted that their suffering is acceptable. It tells the violent that their actions have no consequence. And it tells the comfortable that faith without risk is enough. Christ was not crucified quietly so that his followers could forget those who suffer for his name. Forgetting is a choice. Silence is a decision. And every decision shapes the future of the church. If we allow persecuted Christians in Africa to disappear from our moral imagination, we are not protecting peace. We are training ourselves to live with injustice. Faith that survives only where it is safe is not faith. It is convenience. My second warning is quieter than gunfire, but just as destructive. It is the distortion of faith into a weapon. I have watched sacred words lose their meaning. I have seen prayer turned into a slogan. I have listened to men claim divine authority while committing acts no merciful God could ever bless. And I have felt the weight of something even heavier, the moment when victims no longer know whether to fear the bullet or the name of God spoken by the one holding it. This distortion does not belong to one religion. It does not belong to one culture. It is born wherever fear, power, and desperation meet belief. In parts of Africa, violence now wears the mask of righteousness. And when that happens, the innocent suffer twice. First, by the act itself, and then by the confusion it leaves behind. When faith is fused with brutality, love becomes unrecognizable. Communities begin to fear religion instead of being healed by it. Children grow up learning that prayer is dangerous, that belief invites death, that God is not a shelter but a threat. I speak as a Christian, but also as a leader of a nation of many beliefs. When violence claims divine permission, it poisons the spiritual soil for everyone. It leaves behind a world where faith no longer restrains power, but excuses it. I have spoken with Muslims who weep because their religion has been hijacked by men who preach hatred instead of humility. I have spoken with Christians who struggle to explain their faith to their children because violence has made belief look irrational or cruel. I have spoken with young people who no longer ask which religion is true, only which one will hurt them less. This is the silent victory of extremism. It does not need to conquer territory. It only needs to corrupt trust. And once trust is broken, faith loses its moral voice. It can no longer protect the weak. It can no longer confront the powerful. It becomes a banner for domination, not a refuge for the broken. Silence in the face of religious violence is not neutrality. It is permission. Every time we fail to name brutality as betrayal, we allow it to wear the clothes of holiness. Every time we excuse extremism as inevitable, we surrender our conscience. True faith restrains violence. It disciplines power. It reminds the strong that they will be judged. Any movement that celebrates cruelty while claiming God's blessing has already abandoned him, even if it shouts his name. If this distortion continues, the world will not only reject extremism, it will reject faith itself. And once faith is rejected, the poor lose their defender, the weak lose their shelter, and truth loses its voice. This is my second warning. When faith becomes a weapon, no one remains safe. My third warning is born from a truth few people want to face. In many parts of Africa, faith is no longer challenged only by violence. It is challenged by hunger. I have stood in places where people are not asking theological questions. They are asking how to survive tomorrow. When a man has not eaten, when a mother cannot feed her children, when a young person sees no future beyond dust and war, faith becomes fragile. Not because it is weak, but because the human body has limits. And it is at this breaking point that evil becomes strategic. I have seen armed groups offer bread in exchange for loyalty. I have seen young men told that joining violence is the only way to be protected, the only way to be paid, the only way to be seen. I have seen families pressured to abandon their faith not through argument, but through starvation. Let us speak honestly. When people are forced to choose between God and food, something sacred has already been violated. No ideology has the right to corner the human soul this way. No religion has the right to buy belief with survival. This is not conversion. It is coercion. Faith lost to hunger is not faith defeated. It is faith betrayed by a world that refused to protect the poor. And every time we ignore this reality, we accept a quiet form of spiritual violence, one that leaves no visible wounds, but destroys lives just the same. Poverty does not only empty stomachs, it empties choices. It strips dignity until desperation becomes obedient. And those who exploit this know exactly what they are doing. They do not need to prove their beliefs are true. They only need to prove that hunger is worse than compromise. This is why poverty is not only an economic issue, it is a spiritual battlefield. Whoever feeds the hungry shapes their future. Whoever educates the young forms their conscience. Whoever stands beside the poor earns their trust. And whoever arrives first writes the story of what comes next. Faith must never be offered as an alternative to bread. It must walk beside it. Christ did not ask the hungry to believe first. He fed them first. He healed them first. He restored dignity before asking for faith. If belief is chosen under threat, it is not belief, it is survival. This is my third warning. When poverty is weaponized, faith becomes collateral damage, and the silence of the comfortable becomes part of the crime. My fourth warning concerns the most fragile and the most decisive reality of all: Africa's youth. When I look at the future of this continent, I do not see borders or minerals first. I see faces, young faces, children growing up surrounded by violence, corruption, and broken promises. A generation shaped not by guidance, but by survival. Many of them have never known stability. They were born into conflict, educated by fear, taught early that power belongs to those who take it by force. They do not reject God out of rebellion. They abandon faith out of confusion. They ask questions that are rarely answered honestly. Where was God when my village burned? Why do leaders speak of peace while stealing our future? Why does faith sound powerful in sermons but helpless in the streets? When these questions meet silence, something always fills the space, and what fills it is rarely gentle. I have spoken with young men who joined violent groups not because they believed their ideology, but because they needed belonging. I have spoken with young women who stopped praying because prayer seemed to change nothing. I have spoken with students who associate religion not with hope, but with hypocrisy. This is not the failure of the young. It is the failure of presence. When the church withdraws from education, from moral formation, from daily struggle, others step in. Extremists offer certainty. Criminal networks offer money. Corrupt leaders offer cynicism. Each of them offers identity, and identity is powerful to a generation that has been forgotten. Without truth, lies feel strong. Without hope, anger feels meaningful. Without guidance, violence feels inevitable. Faith must be lived to be believed, and the young see everything. If we do not give them a purpose rooted in dignity, they will accept one rooted in destruction. If we do not invest in their minds, others will invest in their rage. Africa's youth are not lost. They are waiting to see if faith is more than words, waiting to see if leadership includes sacrifice, waiting to see if God's love can be made visible through justice. If that waiting becomes abandonment, the consequences will not stay in Africa. A generation raised by despair does not remain silent. It reshapes the world. This is my fourth warning. A spiritually abandoned generation never remains neutral. If faith does not guide them, something else will. My fifth warning is the hardest to speak because it does not point to enemies. It points to us, to those who believe and yet remain untouched. I have prayed in churches protected by walls, laws, and comfort, places where people sing without fear, where children learn scripture, not survival, where worship ends and everyone goes home safely. These are blessings, but blessings become dangerous when they teach us to forget. Across Africa, Christians are crying out, not always loudly, often in forests, in camps, in villages that no longer exist on maps, and yet many of their brothers and sisters across the world barely hear them. Indifference rarely announces itself as cruelty. It disguises itself as distance, as fatigue, as distraction. We say the problem is complicated. We say we have done what we can. We say we are praying. But there is a difference between prayer that leads to action and prayer that replaces it. I have seen conferences held while villages were burning, statements written while families were running, reports published while graves were being filled, words multiplied, lives disappeared. This indifference is not born from hatred. It is born from hierarchy, from the quiet belief that some lives are more urgent than others, that suffering far away is tragic but tolerable, that faith under fire is unfortunate but not central. But faith does not recognize borders, pain does not ask for passports, and conscience does not excuse selective compassion. When Christians in Africa are killed, the church is wounded. When they are ignored, the wound is left to rot. Indifference trains the heart to accept injustice as normal. And once injustice becomes normal somewhere, it becomes acceptable everywhere. Africa does not need saviors. It needs solidarity. It needs voices that refuse to let suffering disappear quietly. It needs believers who understand that faith is not proven by comfort, but by commitment. Silence sends a message. To the persecutors, no one is watching. To the victims, you are alone. To the next generation, faith can coexist with abandonment. That message is false, and it is dangerous. I have met African Christians who forgive their attackers, but still ask one question. Does the world know we exist? Are we truly part of the same body? When indifference answers, it answers cruelly. This is my fifth warning. Indifference today becomes shame tomorrow. My sixth warning is the one most people misunderstand. Africa is not only a victim of history, it is a front line of the human soul. What is happening here is not isolated, it is not accidental, and it will not remain contained. When faith collapses under pressure in one place, its consequences do not stay there. When violence, greed, and indifference redefine what is normal, that definition travels. And today, Africa is where many of these forces are being tested. Here, faith is stripped of decoration, not by philosophy, but by fire, not by debate, but by survival. There is no space for performance, no reward for empty words, no protection for convenient belief. Here, faith becomes real, or it disappears. I have seen believers who own nothing yet refuse to hate. I have seen communities broken by terror still choose forgiveness. I have seen prayer whispered without microphones and courage lived without witnesses. This is not weakness. It is exposure. And exposure reveals truth. But I have also seen what happens when the world looks away. Darkness becomes confident. Extremism becomes organized. Indifference becomes habit. And what is tested here slowly appears elsewhere. Translated into new languages, adapted to new nations, wearing different flags. Do not believe this struggle is distant. The same forces that exploit poverty here exploit loneliness elsewhere. The same lies that weaponize faith here will distort it wherever fear replaces meaning. The same indifference that ignores Africa today will ignore another suffering tomorrow. Africa is not warning the world with speeches. It is warning the world with consequences. When moral courage collapses here, the world learns that it can collapse anywhere. And when faith survives here, the world is reminded that it still can. This is why Africa matters. Not as a symbol, but as a mirror. A mirror held up to the conscience of humanity. If faith cannot stand where it is costly, it will eventually fail where it is comfortable. If dignity cannot be defended here, it will slowly disappear everywhere. This is my sixth warning. Africa is not the edge of the story. It is the center of a test that will shape the soul of this century. As I bring these warnings to an end, I do not feel lighter. Speaking truth does not remove the burden. It sharpens it. But silence would have been heavier still. I do not pretend these words will change the world overnight. I know how slowly conscience moves. I know how strongly comfort resists being disturbed. But history is not shaped only by armies or laws. It is shaped by moments when ordinary people decide to see clearly. I did not speak to condemn. I spoke to return responsibility to faith, not as guilt, but as love that refuses to remain passive, love that understands something simple and dangerous. Belief without action slowly empties itself of meaning. I wish peace for the world. I wish peace for Africa. I wish peace for Burkina Faso, for its children, for its elders, for its believers of every tradition. But peace is not only the absence of war, it is the presence of justice, of dignity, of courage, and those things do not arrive by accident. Evil rarely begins with hatred. It begins with indifference, with small compromises, with the decision to look away because looking feels too expensive. Every generation is judged by what it chooses to normalize. So I ask you, quietly, honestly, not what others should do, but what faith requires of you, where silence has replaced compassion, where fear has replaced truth, where prayer has replaced responsibility instead of guiding it. Turning away from darkness does not require perfection. It requires direction. It requires choosing again and again to align belief with conscience, to reject violence even when it is justified loudly, to protect the vulnerable even when they are far away, to teach the young that goodness is not weakness and restraint is not surrender. I still believe in redemption. I believe societies can change. I believe faith can heal instead of divide. I believe Africa's story does not end in blood. But belief alone is not enough. It must be carried by choices that cost something. To those who feel overwhelmed, I say this: you are not asked to carry the world. You are asked to refuse indifference where you stand, to remember names instead of numbers, to let suffering interrupt comfort, to allow faith to challenge habits, not decorate them. To those who feel defensive, I offer no accusation, only a mirror. We are all becoming something. The only question is what. History will not ask what we claimed to believe. It will ask what we protected, what we ignored, what we allowed to continue, while there was still time to choose differently. Every morning I wake with the same awareness. Leadership does not grant clarity, it demands it. And conscience does not retire. Each day I must choose again. Vigilance or surrender. There is no final victory, only that choice, again and again. May we choose vigilance. May we choose compassion with courage. And may we never forget, when faith is real, it always asks something of us in return.